All right, so here we find ourselves in the second part of our 10 or 11 team round robin realignment, and we're going to take a look at our Power 5 schools, or in this case, our Power 7, since we do have 10 teams in each conference. There's only one Power Conference school that doesn't have a conference, and that's Notre Dame. As much as I'd love to shove them in a conference, they really don't seem to be too inclined to do so, and at this point are purposefully avoiding it. So, all right, fine. We just won't have them in a conference. Lots of you guys were asking me about Liberty. My original plans were to move them down to FCS because of their absolutely pitiful education scores, considering they're ranked 434th out of 436 national universities in terms of education by the U.S. News & World Report, which is the same place that I took my education rankings for my conference realignment video, if you guys remember that. So they either get shoved into the FCS or moved into independence, because no other university would want to align with how bad their academics are, at least in this alignment. Since they're a talented football team, I'll just go ahead and say they're independents. Go Kennesaw State. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. And the first thing we'll start with is, of course, the West Coast and the Pac-10. Not much changes here from the historical Pac-10. Here you've got both Washington schools, both Oregon schools, Cal, Stanford, USC, UCLA, and then the two Arizona schools. This one might have been the easiest to have done, honestly, because every conference sort of falls in line after they do. You have a lot of historical rivalries here, though, along the West Coast. Of course, Oregon, Washington, Civil War, Oregon, Oregon State, Washington, Washington State, all that up there in the Pacific Northwest is good. Then you have Cal, Stanford, you have USC, UCLA, you have Arizona, Arizona State. So a lot of easy rivalries to keep together, historical rivalries. Next, we move east, and we're going to take a stop in the South first with the new Southern Conference. This conference features much of the old Southwest Conference plus LSU. And Memphis. I decided they fit here, so they'll probably be kicked out of my Metro South and moved here. But you'll notice it's kind of off. The downside to 10-team conferences is a lot of the time old rivalries get kicked around and forced to be played out of conference because you can't fit everybody in 10 or 11 schools. Nobody loses in this more than LSU does. Sure, they keep games against Arkansas and A&M, but those aren't like really historical rivalries. Those are new. Like the Magnolia Bowl isn't in conference anymore. Neither are games against Florida and Alabama. Tulane isn't even in this conference, so they don't really have a rival here, which is probably my biggest failing in this realignment. Another alignment I tried did have Mississippi State and Ole Miss in this conference instead of Tech and Memphis. So if you think this version of the conference fits better, then by all means go for it. You'll just have to do your own moving of other schools around. So that brings us up into the Great Plains, where there was another hard issue to solve. BYU and Utah. So you have basically the entire Big 8 conference with Utah and BYU. Most conferences in this alignment are regional and geographical, but a shortcoming of just 10 teams is that now 2 teams in Utah share a conference with a team in Missouri and Iowa, just because one of them has a forced rivalry with Colorado that the Pac-12 tried to make over 11 years that didn't work. The West Coast is already full of schools. I can't put, Utah and BYU in there to make, more. I could have kicked BYU into independence and had Utah as an 11th member of the Pac, but that just didn't feel right to me either. But lots of rivalries get kept here, which is the main benefit. Bedlam stays, Colorado-Nebraska comes back, the border war returns, even the game for the telephone trophy comes back between Iowa State and Missouri. Red River Shootout goes back to being out of conference like it was for 80 years. It was never a problem then, so I don't expect it to be a problem under this alignment. But it might be the most spaced out conference that we have. It's pretty close to what I'd consider a perfect alignment for the Heartland Conference, though, which drops BYU and Utah in favor of Texas Tech and Arkansas, or maybe replace one of those two with Memphis, either one. If you ignore the alignments of everyone else, like with that SoCon I mentioned earlier, you get a pretty tight conference, has a school in Texas, runs the Plains. It's just Utah and BYU had to go somewhere, and the Heartland made the most sense. Next up, we move to the Midwest and pretty much the Big Ten. I renamed it because every conference here could be the Big Ten, but Great Midwest makes some sense. You have all the old Big Ten teams here. You have Minnesota, you have Wisconsin, Iowa, Northwestern, Illinois, Purdue, Indiana, Ohio State, Michigan, and Michigan State. Nebraska and Penn State are the two big ones that get kicked out. You'll see where those guys, you have Penn State, you'll see where Penn State goes later. Not too much to talk about here. Most of the Big Ten's rivalries are preserved here. Unless you're an Iowa fan, pretending like the game against Nebraska means more to you than the game against Minnesota. Heading down south to the land of the pines, it's the Southeastern Conference, and it's mostly the way it was, except instead of South Carolina, LSU, and Arkansas, you get Florida State. The SEC is one of two conferences with a stake in the state of Florida now. Obviously, they had Florida before, but now they get two schools in the state of Florida, just like the other conference does. But the two schools that they take are more Florida Man than Florida Metro. But pretty much the rest of the SEC stays here. We will always remember the sacrifice that LSU made, though. Staying in the same relative geographic location, let's talk about the ACC. So while the SEC's focus more on college towns, the ACC is more about the coast and metro areas. So you get Florida and Georgia are shared territories now, but the ACC gets the metro areas of Atlanta and Georgia Tech, Miami, and Orlando with UCF. So they also added South Carolina to keep the Palmetto Bowl in state. Tobacco Road stays together, and Virginia remains the lone member in the state of Virginia, given their longer history with the rest of the conference. Virginia Tech then, of course, is kicked up north, which I'm not a huge fan of, but again, 10-team alignments are hard, and some schools get left out. Let's take a look at the Northeast and the Big East Conference then. Louisville and Cincinnati form the westernmost boundary, but the rest of this conference should look pretty familiar. Virginia Tech, West Virginia, Pitt, Rutgers, Syracuse, and Boston College. And then Maryland and Penn State join as well to further flesh out the Northeast. And I just can't leave UConn out of this, so the Big East gets 11 members. I know the Huskies would rather stay with their basketball-playing brethren, but they have the support to play major Division I FBS football, at least monetarily. They just need the conference to do so. The Big 12 isn't it, but it's hard for me to imagine them falling too far between the cracks if Penn State is on the schedule every year. So there you have it, your Power 7. The rules are pretty much the same as the last video I made. Round-robin schedule, meaning you play everyone in your conference and there are no conference championship games. That helps determine seeding for a 12-team playoff with 8 conference champs and 4 wildcards. It'd be funny watching Boise State in the Big West be one of the top 8 ranked teams and seeing if a power conference gets kicked to a wildcard spot. It's quote power conference. If another mid-major conference like the Metro does really well and you get 2 G5s instead of a P5. And then, of course, bowl games stay just because I like them, and that makes sense. I'm still torn on the playoff. Some don't like 12. I would like the mid-majors to have a shot. It would be fun to watch the teams shift every once in a while, too, with seeding. What do you guys think? Let me know where I messed up below, or if there's any way to salvage a 10-team alignment for the power conferences. Let me know about your NIT ideas, too. I know a few people were interested in that. Other than that, though, stay safe out there. Be kind to each other in the comments. I'll see you next time.